4. Negro-American has survived at all is extraordinary, a lesser people might simply have died out, as indeed others have. Negro community has not only survived, but in this political generation has entered national affairs as a moderate, humane, and constructive national force as the highest testament to the healing powers of the democratic ideal and the creative vitality of the Negro people. Not be supposed that the Negro-American community has not paid a fearful price for the incredible mistreatment to which it has been subjected over the past 3 centuries. The Negro community has been forced into a matriarchal structure which, because it is too out of line with the rest of the American society, seriously retards the progress of the group as a whole, and imposes a crushing burden on the Negro male and, in consequence, many Negro women as well. Presumably, no special reason why a society in which males are dominant in family relationships is to be preferred to a matriarchal arrangement. It is clearly a disadvantage for a minority group to be operating on one principle, while the great majority of the population, and the one with the most advantages to begin with, is operating on another. The present situation of the Negro. Ours is a society which presumes male leadership in private and public affairs. The arrangements of society facilitate such leadership and reward it. A subculture, such as that of the Negro American, in which this is not the pattern, is placed at a distinct disadvantage. 18. Earlier word of caution should be repeated. Is much evidence that a considerable number of Negro families have managed to break out of the tangle of pathology and to establish themselves as stable, effective units, living according to patterns of American society in general. Franklin Frazier has suggested that the middle-class Negro American family is, if anything, more patriarchal and protective of its children than the general run of such families. 7 Given equal opportunities, the children of these families will perform as well or better than their white peers. They need no help from anyone, and ask none. Phenomenon is not easily measured. One index is that middle-class Negroes have even fewer children than middle-class whites, indicating a desire to conserve the advances they have made and to ensure that their children do as well or better. Women who marry early to uneducated laborers have more children than white women in the same situation. Negro women who marry at the common age for the middle class to educated men doing technical or professional work have only 4/5 as many children as their white counterparts. It be estimated that as much as half of the Negro community falls into the middle class. However, the remaining half is in desperate and deteriorating circumstances. Because of housing segregation, it is immensely difficult for the stable half to escape from the cultural influences of the unstable one. Children of middle-class Negroes often as not must grow up in, or next to the slums, an experience almost unknown to white middle-class children. Therefore constantly exposed to the pathology of the disturbed group and constantly in danger of being drawn into it. It is for this reason that the propositions put forth in this study may be thought of as having a more or less general application. Most Negro youth are in danger of being caught up in a tangle of pathology that affects their world, and probably a majority are so entrapped. Those who escape do so for one generation only. As things now are, their children may have to run the gauntlet all over again. That is not the least vicious aspect of the world that white America has made for the Negro. Obviously, not every instance of social pathology afflicting the Negro community can be traced to the weakness of family structure. For example, organized crime in the Negro community were not largely controlled by whites, there would be more capital accumulation among Negroes and therefore probably more Negro business enterprises. If it were not for the hostility and fear many whites exhibit toward Negroes, they in turn would be less afflicted by hostility and fear and so on. There is no one Negro community. There is no one Negro problem. There is no one solution. At the center of the tangle of pathology is the weakness of the family structure. Once or twice removed, it will be found to be the principal source of most of the aberrant, inadequate, or antisocial behavior that did not establish but now serves to perpetuate the cycle of poverty and deprivation. Destroying the Negro family under slavery, that white America broke the will of the Negro people. Although that will has reasserted itself in our time, it is a resurgence doomed to frustration unless the viability of the Negro family is restored. The fundamental fact of Negro American family life is the often reversed roles of husband and wife. Robert O. Blood, Jr. Donald M. Wolfe, in a study of Detroit families, note that Negro husbands have unusually low power, 28, and while this is characteristic of all low-income families, the pattern pervades the Negro social structure, the cumulative result of discrimination in jobs, housing, and the poor schooling of Negro men. 9 in 44% of the Negro families studied, the wife was dominant, as against 20% of white wives. Whereas the majority of white families are equalitarian, the largest percentage of Negro families are dominated by the wife, 30. The matriarchal pattern of so many Negro families reinforces itself over the generations. This process begins with education. Although the gap appears to be closing at the moment, for a long while, Negro females were better educated than Negro males, and this remains true today for the Negro population as a whole. The difference in educational attainment between non-white men and women in the labor force is even greater. Men lag 1.1 years behind women. Disparity in educational attainment of male and female youth 16 to 21 who were out of school in February 1963 is striking. The non-white males, 66.3% were not high school graduates, compared with 55.0% of the females. A similar difference existed at the college level, with 4.5% of the males having completed 1 to 3 years of college compared with 7.3% of the females. Poor performance of the male in school exists from the very beginning, and the magnitude of the difference was documented by the 1960 census and statistics on the number of children who have fallen 1 or more grades below the typical grade for children of the same age. More frequently fallen behind at every age level. White boys also lag behind white girls, but at a differential of 1 to 6 percentage points. 1960, 39% of all white persons 25 years of age and over who had completed 4 or more years of college were women. 53% of the non-whites who had attained this level were women. However, the gap is closing. By October 1963, there were slightly more Negro men in college than women. Among whites there were almost twice as many men as women enrolled. There is much evidence that Negro females are better students than their male counterparts. Thompson of Dillard University, in a private communication on January 9, 1965, writes, "As low as is the aspirational level among lower-class Negro girls, it is considerably higher than among the boys. For example, I have examined the honor rolls in Negro high schools for about 10 years. As a rule, from 75 to 90% of all Negro honor students are girls." 21. Dr. Thompson reports that 70% of all applications for the National Achievement Scholarship Program financed by the Ford Foundation for Outstanding Negro High School graduates are girls, despite special efforts by high school principals to submit the names of boys. For this new program for outstanding Negro students were recently announced. On an inspection of the names, only about 43% of all the 639 finalists were male. However, in the regular National Merit Scholarship Program, males received 67% of the 1964 scholarship awards. These disparities have carried over to the area of employment and income. In 1 out of 4 Negro families where the husband is present, is an earner, and someone else in the family works, the husband is not the principal earner. The comparable figure for whites is 18%. It is clear that Negro females have established a strong position for themselves in white-collar and professional employment, precisely the areas of the economy which are growing most rapidly and to which the highest prestige is accorded. Committee on Equal Employment Opportunity, making a preliminary report on employment in 1964 of over 16,000 companies with nearly 5 million employees, revealed this pattern with dramatic emphasis. Negro males outnumber Negro females by a ratio of 4 to 1. Yet Negro males represent only 1.2% of all males in white-collar occupations, while Negro females represent 3% of the total female white-collar workforce. Negro males represent 1.1% of all male professionals, whereas Negro females represent roughly 6% of all female professionals. In technician occupations, Negro males represent 2% of all male technicians while Negro females represent roughly 10% of all female technicians. It would appear therefore that there are proportionately 4 times as many Negro females in significant white-collar jobs than Negro males. Though it is evident that office and clerical jobs account for approximately 50% of all Negro female white-collar workers, it is significant that 6 out of every 100 Negro females are in professional jobs. Substantially similar to the rate of all females in such jobs. Approximately 7 out of every 100 Negro females are in technician jobs. This exceeds the proportion of all females in technician jobs, approximately 5 out of every 100. Females in skilled jobs are almost the same as that of all females in such jobs. 9 out of every 100 Negro males are in skilled occupations while 21 out of 100 of all males are in such jobs, 31. Is to be seen in the federal government, where special efforts have been made recently to ensure equal employment opportunity for Negroes. Efforts have been notably successful in departments such as labor, where some 19% of employees are now Negro. A not disproportionate percentage, given the composition of the workforce in the areas where the main 22 offices are located. However, it may well be that these efforts have redounded mostly to the benefit of Negro women, and may even have accentuated the comparative disadvantage of Negro men. 80% of the Negro employees of the Department of Labor are women, as contrasted with only 42% of the white employees. Professional labor department employees, where the most employment opportunities exist for all groups, Negro women outnumber Negro men 4 to 1, and average almost 1 grade higher in classification. Testimony to the effects of these patterns in Negro family structure is widespread, and hardly to be doubted. In the matriarchal Negro society, mothers made sure that if one of their children had a chance for higher education, the daughter was the one to pursue it. 32. On family functioning and role performance of this historical experience, economic deprivation is what you might predict. As a husband and as a father, the Negro male is made to feel inadequate, not because he is unlovable or unaffectionate, lacks intelligence, or even a gray flannel suit. Society that measures a man by the size of his paycheck, he doesn't stand very tall in a comparison with his white counterpart. Situation he may react with withdrawal, bitterness toward society, aggression both within the family and racial group, self-hatred, or crime. He may escape through a number of avenues that help him to lose himself in fantasy or to compensate for his low status through a variety of exploits. 33. Thomas Pettigrew. A wife in this situation can easily become disgusted with her financially dependent husband, and her rejection of him further alienates the male from family life. their experiences with men, many Negro mothers often act to perpetuate the mother-centered pattern by taking a greater interest in their daughters than their sons. 34. Brooks. Patriarchal structure, the women are transmitting the culture. 35. Dorothy Height. Woman has a major underlying concern. It is the status of the Negro man and his position in the community and his need for feeling himself an important person, free and able to make his contribution in the whole society in order that he may strengthen his home. 36. M. McIntyre. The illegitimacy rate always has been high, about 8 times the white rate in 1940 and somewhat higher today, even though the white illegitimacy rate also is climbing. The Negro statistics are symptomatic, of some old socioeconomic problems, not the least of which are 23. Women among Negro men and compensating higher labor force propensity among Negro women. Both operate to enlarge the mother's role, undercutting the status of the male and making many Negro families essentially matriarchal. Man's uncertain employment prospects, matriarchy, and the high cost of divorces combine to encourage desertion. The poor man's divorce increases the number of couples not married, and thereby also increases the Negro illegitimacy rate. Higher Negro birth rates are increasing the non-white population, while migration into cities like Detroit, New York, Philadelphia, and Washington, D.C. is making the public assistance roles in such cities heavily, even predominantly, Negro. 37. Williams, Jr. in a study of Elmira, New York. 7% of Negro adults reported themselves as married spouse present, as compared with 78% of native white American Gentiles, 91% of Italian American, and 96% of Jewish informants. 3 unmarried Negro youths interviewed, 22% did not have their mother living in the home with them, and 42% reported that their father was not living in their home. The youth did not know their father's present occupation, and 2/3 of a sample of 150 Negro adults did not know what the occupation of their father's father had been. Of the youth said that they had brothers and sisters living in other communities. Another 40% reported relatives living in their home who were not parents, siblings, or grandparent. 38. The failure of youth. Williams's account of Negro youth growing up with little knowledge of their fathers, less of their fathers' occupations, still less of family occupational traditions, is in sharp contrast to the experience of the white child. The white family, despite many variants, remains a powerful agency not only for transmitting property from one generation to the next, but also for transmitting no less valuable contracts with the world of education and work. At an earlier age, the carpenters, wayrights, weavers, mercers, farmers, smiths acquired their names as well as their trades from their fathers and grandfathers. Children today still learn the patterns of work from their fathers even though they may no longer go into the same jobs. White children without fathers at least perceive all about them the pattern of men working. Negro children without fathers flounder and fail. Not always, to be sure. The Negro community produces its share, very possibly more than its share, of young people who have the something extra that carries them over the worst obstacles. Persons are always a minority. The common run of young people in a group facing serious obstacles to success do not succeed. Index of the disadvantage of Negro youth in the United States is their consistently poor performance on the mental tests that are a standard means of measuring ability and performance in the present generation. 24. Absolutely no question of any genetic differential. Intelligence potential is distributed among Negro infants in the same proportion as among Icelanders or Chinese or any other group. Society, however, impairs the Negro potential. The statement of the HARYOU report that there is no basic disagreement over the fact that Central Harlem students are performing poorly in school, 39 may be taken as true of Negro slum children throughout the United States. Children in Central Harlem have a median IQ of 87.7, which means that perhaps 1/3 of the children are scoring at levels perilously near to those of retardation. IQ declines in the first decade of life, rising only slightly thereafter. Of broken families on the performance of Negro youth has not been extensively measured, but studies that have been made show an unmistakable influence. Deutsch and Bert Brown, investigating intelligence test differences between Negro and white first and fifth graders of different social classes, found that there is a direct relationship between social class and IQ. Rises it is the other, but more for whites than Negroes. This is surely a result of housing segregation, referred to earlier, which makes it difficult for middle-class Negro families to escape the slums. Authors explain that it is much more difficult for the Negro to attain identical middle or upper middle class status with whites. Social class gradations are less marked for Negroes because Negro life in a caste society is considerably more homogeneous than is life for the majority group. 40. The authors look for background variables other than social class which might explain the difference. One of the most striking differences between the Negro and white groups is the consistently higher frequency of broken homes and resulting family disorganization in the Negro group. Further, they found that children from homes where fathers are present have significantly higher scores than children in homes without fathers. Influence of the father's presence was then tested within the social classes and school grades for Negroes alone. That a consistent trend within both grades at the lower SES social class level appears, and in no case is there a reversal of this trend, for males, females, and the combined group. IQs of children with fathers in the home are always higher than those who have no father in the home. 42. Say that broken homes may also account for some of the differences between Negro and white intelligence scores. 43. Of fifth graders with fathers absent were lower than the scores of first graders with fathers absent, and while the authors point out that it is cross-sectional data and does not reveal the duration of the father's absence, tapping is the cumulative effect of fatherless years. 44. 5. Difference in ability to perform has its counterpart in statistics on actual school performance. White boys from families with both parents present are more likely to be going to school than boys with only one parent present, and enrollment rates are even lower when neither parent is present. Boys from broken homes are in school, they do not do as well as the boys from whole families. Grade retardation is higher when only one parent is present, and highest when neither parent is present. Of the Negro youth in making fundamental decisions about education is shown in a 1959 study of Negro and white dropouts in Connecticut high schools. 29% of Negro male dropouts discussed their decision to drop out of school with their fathers, compared with 65% of the white males. 38% of the Negro males were from broken homes. In fact, 26% of the Negro males did not discuss this major decision in their lives with anyone at all, compared with only 8% of white males. Negro apprenticeship by the New York State Commission Against Discrimination in 1960 concluded. Negro youth are seldom exposed to influences which can lead to apprenticeship. Negroes are not apt to have relatives, friends, or neighbors in skilled occupations. Likely to be in secondary schools where they receive encouragement and direction from alternate role models. Minority community, skilled Negro, models, after whom the Negro youth might pattern himself are rare, while substitute sources which could provide the direction, encouragement, resources, and information needed to achieve skilled craft standing are non-existent. 45. Delinquency and crime. The impact of poverty, failure, and isolation among Negro youth has had the predictable outcome in a disastrous delinquency and crime rate. Pattern of discrimination, Negro children in all public and private orphanages are a smaller proportion of all children than their proportion of the population, although their needs are clearly greater. On the other hand, Negroes represent a third of all youth in training schools for juvenile delinquents. Probable that at present, a majority of the crimes against the person, such as rape, murder, and aggravated assault, are committed by Negroes. Of course, no absolute evidence, inference can only be made from arrest and prison population statistics. that follow chart not reproduced unquestionably are biased against Negroes, who are arraigned much more casually than are whites, but it may be doubted that the bias is great enough to affect the general proportions. On the urban frontier the ratio is worse. 3 out of every 5 arrests for these crimes were of Negroes. So in 1963, 3/4 of the persons arrested for such crimes were Negro. In Detroit, the same proportions held. 37% of all persons in federal and state prisons were Negro. In that year, 56% of the homicide and 57% of the assault offenders committed to state institutions were Negro. Overwhelming number of offenses committed by Negroes are directed toward other Negroes. The cost of crime to the Negro community is a combination of that to the criminal and to the victim. Research on the effects of broken homes on delinquent behavior recently surveyed by Thomas F. Pettigrew in a profile of the Negro American is summarized below, along with several other studies of the question. Found that 3/4, twice the expected ratio, of Philadelphia's Negro delinquents who came before the law during 1948 did not live with both their natural parents. 46. Juvenile crime. Eleanor and Sheldon Gluck also found that a higher proportion of delinquent than non-delinquent boys came from broken homes. Identified 5 critical factors in the home environment that made a difference in whether boys would become delinquents. Discipline of boy by father, supervision of boy by mother, affection of father for boy, affection of mother for boy, and cohesiveness of family. 1952, when the New York City Youth Board set out to test the validity of these 5 factors as predictors of delinquency, a problem quickly emerged. The sample consisted of white boys of mainly Irish, Italian, Lithuanian, and English descent. The youth board group was 44% Negro and 14% Puerto Rican, and the frequency of broken homes within these groups was out of proportion to the total number of delinquents in the population. 47. Of these cases, the father was usually never in the home at all, absent for the major proportion of the boy's life, or was present only on occasion. Prediction table was reduced to 3 factors: supervision of boy by mother, discipline of boy by mother, and family cohesiveness within what family, in fact, existed, but was, nonetheless, 85% accurate in predicting delinquents and 96% accurate in predicting non-delinquents. Researchers who have focused upon the good boy in high delinquency neighborhoods noted that they typically come from exceptionally stable, intact families. 48. Psychological research demonstrates the personality effects of being reared in a disorganized home without a father. Study showed that children from fatherless homes seek immediate gratification of their desires far more than children with fathers present. 49 Others revealed that children who hunger for immediate gratification are more prone to delinquency. 7. Other less social behavior. 502 Psychologists, Pettigrew says, maintain that inability to delay gratification is a critical factor in immature, criminal, and neurotic behavior. 51. Finally, Pettigrew discussed the evidence that a stable home is a crucial factor in counteracting the effects of racism upon Negro personality. Supportive home can effectively compensate for many of the restrictions the Negro child faces outside of the ghetto. Consequently, type of home life a Negro enjoys as a child may be far more crucial for governing the influence of segregation upon his personality than the form the segregation takes, legal or informal, Southern or Northern. 52. University study of youth in the lowest socioeconomic class in New Haven in 1950 whose behavior was followed through their 18th year revealed that among the delinquents in the group, 38% came from broken homes, compared with 24% of non-delinquents. 53. President's Task Force on Manpower Conservation in 1963 found that of young men rejected for the draft for failure to pass the mental tests, 42% of those with a court record came from broken homes, compared with 30% of those without a court record. The non-white rejectees in the study with a court record came from broken homes. Examination of the family background of 44,448 delinquency cases in Philadelphia between 1949 and 1954 documents the frequency of broken homes among delinquents. 2% of the Negro delinquents and 36% of white delinquents were not living with both parents. 33% of non-white children and 7% of white children in Philadelphia were living in homes without both parents. Repeaters were even more likely to be from broken homes than first offenders. 54. The armed forces. The mark of inadequate preparation for life is the failure rate on the Armed Forces mental test. The Armed Forces qualification test is not quite a mental test, nor yet an education test. Of ability to perform at an acceptable level of competence. It roughly measures ability that ought to be found in an average 7th or 8th grade student. A grown young man who cannot pass this test is in trouble. Percent of Negroes fail it. Rate almost 4 times that of the whites. Navy, Air Force, and Marines conduct by far the largest and most important education and training activities of the federal government, as well as provide the largest single source of employment in the nation. Service is disruptive in some respects. For those comparatively few who are killed or wounded in combat, or otherwise, the personal sacrifice is inestimable. Service in the armed forces over the past quarter century has worked greatly to the advantage of those involved. The training and experience of military duty itself is unique, the advantages that have. 28. Followed in the form of the GI Bill, mortgage guarantees, federal life insurance, civil service preference, veterans hospitals, and veterans pensions are singular, to say the least. Service in the armed forces is at least nominally a duty of all male citizens coming of age. It is clear that the present system does not enable Negroes to serve in anything like their proportionate numbers. The question of discrimination. Induction into the armed forces is based on a variety of objective tests and standards, but these tests nonetheless have the effect of keeping the number of Negroes disproportionately small. 1963 The United States Commission on Civil Rights reported that, a decade ago, Negroes constituted 8% of the armed forces. Today, they continue to constitute 8% of the armed forces, 55. 1964 Negroes constituted 11.8% of the population, but probably remain at 8% of the armed forces. Of Negro underrepresentation in the armed forces is greater than might at first be supposed. If Negroes were represented in the same proportions in the military as they are in the population, they would number 300,000 plus. It would be over 100,000 more than at present. 1964 strength figures. If the more than 100,000 unemployed Negro men were to have gone into the military, the Negro male unemployment rate would have been 7.0% in 1964 instead of 9.1%. 63 The Civil Rights Commission commented on the occupational aspect of military service for Negroes. Negro enlisted men enjoy relatively better opportunities in the armed forces than in the civilian economy in every clerical, technical, and skilled field for which the data permit comparison. 56. However, an even more important issue involved in military service for Negroes. In the United States Armed Forces is the only experience open to the Negro American in which he is truly treated as an equal. Not as a Negro equal to a white, but as one man equal to any other man in a world where the category, Negro, and white, do not exist. Statement of the ideal rather than reality, it is an ideal that is close to realization. In food, dress, housing, pay, work, the Negro in the armed forces is equal and is treated that way. Another special quality about military service for Negro men, it is an utterly masculine world. The strains of the disorganized and matrifocal family life in which so many Negro youth come of age, the armed forces are a dramatic and desperately needed change, a world away from women, a world run by strong men of unquestioned authority, where discipline, if harsh, less orderly and predictable, and where rewards, if limited, are granted on the basis of performance. Theme of a current Army recruiting message states it as clearly as can be: in the U.S. Army you get to know what it means to feel like a man. 29. In Civil Rights Commission hearings in Mississippi, a witness testified that his Army service was in fact the only time I ever felt like a man. Majority of Negro youth and probably 3/4 of Mississippi Negroes fail the selective service education test and are rejected. Participation in the armed forces would be less than it is, were it not for a proportionally larger share of voluntary enlistments and reenlistments. Thus 16.3% of Army sergeants are Negro. Alienation. Alienation may by now have been used in too many ways to retain a clear meaning, but it will serve to sum up the equally numerous ways in which large numbers of Negro youth appear to be withdrawing from American society. The startling way in which this occurs is that the men are just not there when the census enumerator comes around. To Bureau of Census population estimates for 1963, there are only 87 non-white males for every 100 females in the 30 to 34 year age group. Ratio does not exceed 90 to 100 throughout the 25 to 44 year age bracket. In the urban Northeast, there are only 76 males per 100 females 20 to 24 years of age, and males as a percent of females are below 90% throughout all ages after 14. Not really fewer men than women in the 20 to 40 age bracket. What obviously involved is an error in counting. The surveyors simply do not find the Negro man. Donald J. Bogue and his associates, who have studied the federal count of the Negro man, place the error as high as 19.8% at age 28. A typical error of around 15% is estimated from age 19 through 43. Preliminary research in the Bureau of the Census on the 1960 enumeration has resulted in similar conclusions, although not necessarily the same estimates of the extent of the error. Male can be found at age 17 and 18. On the basis of birth records and mortality records, the conclusion must be that he is there at age 19 as well. The enumerators do find him. His answers to the standard questions asked in the monthly unemployment survey often result in counting him as not in the labor force. In other words, Negro male unemployment may in truth be somewhat greater than reported. Participation rates of non-white men have been falling since the beginning of the century and for the past decade have been lower than the rates for white men. In 1964, the participation rates were 78% for white men and 75.8% for non-white men. Almost 1 percentage point of this difference was due to a higher proportion of non-white men unable to work because of long-term physical or mental illness. It seems reasonable to assume that the rest of the difference is due to discouragement about finding a job. Male labor force participation rates were as high as the white rates. There would have been 140,000 more non-white males in the labor force in 1964. If we further assume that the 140,000 would have been unemployed, the unemployment rate for non-white men would have been 0.5% instead of the recorded rate of 9%, and the ratio between the non-white rate and the white rate would have jumped from 2.1 to 2.41. Stated or not, the official unemployment rates for Negroes are almost unbelievable. Employment statistics for Negro teenagers, 29% in January 1965, reflect lack of training and opportunity in the greatest measure, but it may not be doubted that they also reflect a certain failure of nerve. For a job. Secretary of Labor Wirtz asked a young man on a Harlem street corner. Why, was the reply. Cloward and Robert Ontel have commented on the withdrawal in a discussion of the Mobilization for Youth project on the Lower East Side of New York. Temporary slum and minority youth probably lack that similar children in earlier periods possessed is not motivation but some minimal sense of competence. In work with these youth, by what appears to be a low tolerance for frustration. They are not able to absorb setbacks. Minor irritants and rebuffs are magnified out of all proportion to reality. They react as they do because they are not equal to the world that confronts them, and they know it. It is the knowing that is devastating. Had the occupational structure remained intact, or had the education provided to them kept pace with occupational changes, the situation would be a different one. But it is not, and that is what we and they have to contend with. 58. Addiction is a characteristic form of withdrawal. 63. Negroes made up 54% of the addict population of the United States. Although the Federal Bureau of Narcotics reports a decline in the Negro proportion of new addicts, HARYOU reports the addiction rate in Central Harlem rose from 22.1 per 10,000 in 1955 to 40.4 in 1961.59. Larger fact about the alienation of Negro youth than the tangle of pathology described by these statistics. It is a fact particularly difficult to grasp by white persons who have in recent years shown increasing awareness of Negro problems. The generation of Negro youth growing up in the urban ghettos has probably less personal contact with the white world than any generation in the history of the Negro American. 60. World War II. It could be said that in general the Negro and white worlds live, if not together, at least side by side. Certainly they did, and do, in the South. Since World War II, however, the two worlds have drawn physically apart. Of this development was the construction in the 1940s and 1950s of the vast white, middle and lower middle class suburbs around all the nation's cities. Increasingly the inner cities have been left to Negroes, who now share almost no community life with whites. 1. Because of this new housing pattern, most of which has been financially assisted by the federal government, it is probable that the American school system has become more, rather than less segregated in the past 2 decades. Full integration has not occurred in the South, where a decade after Brown versus Board of Education only 1 Negro in 9 is attending school with white children. Despite strenuous official efforts, neighborhoods and therefore schools are becoming more and more of one class and one color. New York City, in the school year 1957-58 there were 64 schools that were 90% of more Negro or Puerto Rican. 6 years later there were 134 such schools. Diminution of white middle-class contacts for a large percentage of Negroes, observers report that the Negro churches have all but lost contact with men in the northern cities as well. Be a normal condition of urban life, but it is probably a changed condition for the Negro American and cannot be a socially desirable development. Religious movement that appears to have enlisted a considerable number of lower-class Negro males in northern cities of late is that of the Black Muslims, a movement based on total rejection of white society, even though it emulates whites more. The tangle of pathology is tightening.